patience. Sometimes patience is the key to victory. Sometimes it leads to very little, and it seems like it's not worth it. And you wonder why you waited so long for something so disappointing.
Black Widow was not the worst, but it was hardly the slick film I was hoping for. But before I get into the good and the bad, let me say that I split this review into spoiler-free and spoiler sections, and I'll give you a warning before I start ruining the surprises, though I will assume you've at least watched a trailer or two. Now, let's get to it. Here are my scholarly thoughts. The trailers gave away very little about the plot of Black Widow. If you think you know what will happen, beyond a general sense that this is a sort of a spy thriller, then you're probably wrong. Although if you're familiar with trends in the MCU or Hollywood tentpole movies in general, then you might be correct. The plot itself was rather incidental, and it's a real problem with making prequels. You see, if there aren't stakes, the audience can't get invested in the standalone adventure. If the stakes are too small, it undercuts the hero, and if the stakes are too big, it undercuts the series as a whole. I feel like Black Widow was in a sort of twilight zone where things mattered a lot and were supposed to matter in a larger context, but there's zero evidence or foreshadowing for any of that in any other MCU film, so it was hard for me to take seriously, and didn't feel integrated into the big picture compared to how the shady side of S.H.I.E.L.D. portrayed in Avengers pays dividends in The Winter Soldier. Speaking of The Winter Soldier, this movie is kinda part of the Captain America series, not just for plot reasons, but also in terms of containing political themes and having an overall grounded approach in the style of a spy thriller. While I agree with that aesthetic choice, since Black Widow was a huge part of Cap's movies, I think the plot was too derivative. That being said, the plot was a neat platform for the characters, and some of them worked really well, but others not so much. The acting was all competent, especially when it came to handling the shifts from comedy to drama. The characters were all good in concept, but I don't think they all came off well. Black Widow herself, well, it was nice to see Scarlett Johansson in the role again, and she managed to feel like the same character in surroundings unfamiliar to the viewers. Though I think all the new characters crowded her quite a lot. Obviously, she needs to interact with someone, and all the other Avengers are kinda busy staying in place for Infinity War, so having a cast of unfamiliar faces was almost inevitable, but I think the time spent establishing them took away a lot of time that could have been spent with a fan favorite. That being said, she's in basically every scene, so you'll see lots of her. And those new faces had things to offer too. Yelena, portrayed by Florence Pugh, was quite engaging and funny while also being competent, believable, and human. And she had a solid rapport with Johansson, so that's a good thing. I had some issues with how she fits into things, but let's save that for spoilers. I'm also gonna save most of my comments on Red Guardian and Melina for the spoiler sections as well, but I'll just say here that they were entertaining and created a neat generational contrast for the younger characters, but again, integration with the rest of the movie could have been a lot better, and both had some missed potential in my opinion. Taskmaster was creepy and imposing. MCU films that aren't Avengers movies tend to have masked villains that don't have much lasting impact, and while I don't know if Taskmaster will really have any long-term effect, the character definitely had a presence, even though Taskmaster's arc was, in my opinion, anticlimactic. There's a twist involving the character's identity, but if you guess it or not, it doesn't really have much impact. Another issue I had was that the character was really sold in the trailers as utilizing the skills of the other Avengers, but I thought that was very underplayed in the movie itself, especially considering what a unique idea it is. The fight scenes and action were pretty solid for the most part, just those occasional moments when I knew anyone without superpowers should have been in horrible pain, but maybe that's par for the course in the genre, and it doesn't kill it for me. Winter Soldier and Civil War still rank as my favorites in terms of MCU fight scenes. But I liked most of the choreographies, and how you could see the similarities between how all the Widows fought as compared to how Alexei fights, or when Taskmaster does mimic one of the Avengers. And there was a lot of action, and quite a lot of it featured Taskmaster, taking us straight into the two-fight problem as per usual for a superhero movie. Now, the two-fight problem is something I touched on in my Mortal Kombat video, so I'll just summarize it here. Heroes and villains generally need to have multiple encounters to establish the villain as a threat, but if done poorly, it makes the villain look incompetent. This movie did not make that mistake at all. Taskmaster always felt incredibly threatening, and fights generally ended in ways that simply made the heroes look clever rather than making the villain look dumb, so that was good. But this wasn't the case for every beat of the story, and there were multiple gaps, but now I'm gonna start talking spoilers. So if you want to avoid that until you see the film, then skip to this timestamp. I'll give you a second. Okay, let's talk spoilers. And that means I'm going to complain a little bit about some stuff. The Taskmaster reveal just wasn't something I cared about. First off, it was obvious to me from the get-go that a woman was under the armor just from knowing a little bit about anatomy. Even though I would have liked more of the mimicry stuff, the fights with her were a treat to watch. But the film made little effort to make me care about who was under there, so yeah, it didn't matter to me. The film gave Melina a free pass. She was a huge part of the bad guy's plot, what with all the research she did, including the routine torture of animals, and she just walks free at the end. I get that she helped our heroes, but I think it came way too easy, especially after the hard time the movie gave Alexei, the Red Guardian, who was given so much grief when he had done nothing but be in prison the last 2 decades, and really needed an opportunity to shine instead of just being the butt of 1,000 jokes, even though I'll admit they were pretty funny sometimes. I was waiting for his redemption and it just never came. He didn't even get a significant farewell at the end. Yelena was way too hard of a sell in this movie. They did everything they could think of to make her relationship with Nat meaningful, like have her give Nat the vest from Infinity War as a goodbye present and trying to generate interest in the upcoming Hawkeye series with the stinger at the end. I get it, Disney. Yelena will return. Again, I liked the character, but I can't pretend to be as attached to her sisterly connection with Nat after just one movie as I was with Nat's connection with Steve, Clint, and Banner, or even Tony Stark. But Black Widow had a problem with its connections to previously existing MCU material in general, so Natasha going off at the end to rescue the other Avengers captured in Civil War kinda rubbed me the wrong way. It was sorta neat to see how she got into her starting position for Infinity War, but between this and Falcon and the Winter Soldier and the fact that the Soviets also somehow recreated that until recently impossible to synthesize super soldier serum, I'm beginning to wonder if anyone at Disney remembers what Steve Rogers was really like or that he ever existed. In fact, this movie undercut her role as an Avenger far too much. To me, her little speech at the end saying she has 2 families doesn't match with this from Endgame.
I used to have nothing, and then I got this job, this family, and I was better because of it. And even though they're gone, I'm still trying to be better.
I mean, you'd think from how she talks in Endgame that her tombstone would rate being an Avenger a little higher. There were times when I really had to scratch my head at the mechanics of what I was looking at, like at the end when Ross is closing in and all of our main characters are saying goodbye as everyone leaves via airship, leaving Natasha behind, who then escapes without any explanation because the plot needs her free to participate in Infinity War. Couldn't they just escape and say goodbye later? And a little caveat, if you're a writer, remember, put the needs of your characters first. Ask, what should they do in this spot? Anyway, there's other stuff, like Nat getting the vials out of the secure case when she's fighting Taskmaster, but mostly that's nitpicky stuff that there's little point in discussing. The biggest fault for me was that the villain is so forgettable, I haven't needed to mention him until now. Ray Winston did a great job of being incredibly gross, and I get that they wanted the film to make a statement about abusive relationships, and how abusers are cowardly by nature, but the way they shifted all the blame onto the shoulders of one person, literally letting everyone else off guilt-free and portraying every woman as just a poor victim was not believable, or engaging to me, especially when Natasha's whole arc within the MCU, and even this movie, is about being responsible for her own mistakes and wanting to make amends for a ledger dripping red. But gender politics is an unfortunate reality of the modern cinema scene, so it was to be expected, I guess. To summarize, I'd give Black Widow a 5 out of 10. Not horrible, not at all, but very mediocre, especially after the long wait. The action and acting are worth watching on the big screen, but don't expect another Winter Soldier or Iron Man, and if you didn't care for the girl power moment in Endgame, then I can almost guarantee it's not a movie for you. But as usual, this is just my opinion. Let me know yours down in the comments. Subscribe, like, or maybe dislike, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.